I am William Joseph Roberts. I write sci-fi, fantasy, horror, anything the evil mind squirrels demand of me, and I'm also the lead publisher at Three Ravens Publishing.
I'm Philip K. Booker. I'm a writer of science fiction, fantasy, horror, comedies, and smutty romance occasionally. And I write primarily with Three Ravens Publishing and edit with them as well.
Where's my book?
And it's in the car.
So I'm going to mix this up and say what I write and everything at the end so you can look at my books. Instead, I'm going to say I'm Gen X. I grew up in the country doing 4-H, chores, and all that other stuff. And I have absolutely no idea what it's like to be entertained by an iPad as a child.
Tamara Lowry. I'm originally from Chattanooga, but I've lived pretty much all over the Southeast, and I'm the author of The Adventures of Pig and Wolf, steampunk serialized fiction, and Waves of Darkness, Pirates and Vampires.
My name is Amy Herring. I write under my pseudonym, Louise Herring Jones. I am from Huntsville, Alabama. I've lived there for all but 12 years of my life. I was born in Madrid. My dad was a military attaché to the embassy there. So my mother's from Pennsylvania. So I've got kind of like 3 areas of origin. I write short stories and novels. I've read a little bit of very bad poetry, and I'm publishing about 15 anthologies.
Okay, just for shits and giggles, we have an author that is in New Zealand. He has never been to a panel, never been to a convention. So I've got Piotr in New Zealand sitting here, just kind of taking up space. And if you do have a question, Piotr, you can ask, otherwise shut up, we're doing a panel. So he's attending from New Zealand right now. So when it comes down to what you're writing, what becomes the most important to you when you're writing from what you know? Is it, the content? Is it trying to pass on some historical information or regional information? What is it that you tend to always include somewhere?
For me, it's the stupid stuff. Most of us, regardless of what you like, have seen the whole roll in the hay trope or in the movie where they grab each other and fall into the pile of hay. Yeah, hay is not a good place for sex in any way, shape, or form. It pokes through jeans, it pokes through blankets, it leaves scratches, and if you're even mildly allergic, it leaves welts. So I do stuff like that, or the chosen one rides a horse for a first time, and they ride for 8-10 hours, and then they get off and set up camp. I would like to tell you from experience, you will fall off that horse, and you will not know how to stand up, because if you are not somebody who rides consistently on a daily basis for long periods of time, there's no standing. You're going to be lucky if you crumple with any level of grace. And so I like including stuff like that, people, it's this same sort of thing, like, if you've ever been on a beach, sand gets everywhere, including all those places you don't want sand.
Yep.
It looks really great in the movies, no.
It's not great in concept. I mean, well, and that. So skinny dipping, that's a good one to go. Skinny dipping in the South. Sure, if you want to go hang out with the water moccasins, depending on where you're at, do you really want to go swimming with them? I mean, up in the Northeast, maybe.
In my pool. My skinny dipping in my pool is absolutely fine.
Pulling all the ticks,
Yes.
Yeah.
mosquito bites, and explaining all those and the nether bits.
Leeches.
Yeah, and that's just things you learn from experience of going out in the woods, camping, having those moments. But, and it's regional. I mean, you go into the Northeast, you go up into like North Dakota and stuff like that, they don't have the same kind of critters we got here.
Well, yeah, because see, I grew up in Northern California, which is, regardless, if you've never been to California, California is not all LA. You hit about San Francisco on up, it is pure farmland. Some of it is grapes, some of it is rice, some of it is trees, but there's no big cities. So you're doing 4-H. For me, when I was a kid, the nearest grocery store was 30 miles. So you did your grocery shopping once a week. I came out south, and my boyfriend and I took up here in Tennessee, the ride that you take up to Lookout Mountain. That one.
Yeah.
And I'm looking down, I'm like, what is that? And he's like, that's a groundhog. And I'm like, that's a what? Because for me, I had always equated groundhogs with gophers, okay?
Oh, no.
Gophers are about this big, that, maybe cats brought them in right here. That groundhog had to weigh 35 pounds and to weigh an ounce.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, are you kidding?
Gophers here, they're as small as moles,
Yeah.
if
no.
you have them at all.
Yeah, no, our gophers were pretty big. The same thing with, I honestly thought the cute little bunny rabbits from Peter Rabbit and stuff were like the rabbits I raised. I didn't realize cottontails were actually a really live thing, because I had jackrabbits. And jackrabbits are 15 to 20 pounds and mean. And one time I'm like, oh my gosh, cottontails are real? They actually hop around? I was
Yeah,
like,
and we got them here in the area.
yes, and I was like, oh.
They eat my plants.
The cats bring them in regularly.
Yeah.
They're much easier to catch than jackrabbits.
Yes.
They jump in front of my car.
Do the cats
I
at
have a
least
rabbit
make sure
seating
they're
car.
no longer mobile before they
No.
get in? Of course
No,
not.
no, but I have, let's see, so far, in the last 3 months, I have chased 2 chipmunks,
Oh my,
1 bird,
yeah.
2 rats, a snake, and an innumerable amount of lizards.
There's a reason my cats are not allowed outside, that's one of them.
What about you, Jim?
Oh, I would say, some of mine is writing, like with my Waves of Darkness series. I based my main character out of Savannah, Georgia. I have not actually lived in Savannah, but I have lived in southeast Georgia, and I've visited Savannah a few times, and it's a really interesting place with a really interesting history if you can get past its Texas-sized ego. Yeah, my mother-in-law was from that area, so it's like, all I was hearing about is this and this and this started in Savannah. I was like, no, it didn't. I know where that started. It did not start in Savannah. But I used that as the backdrop and did the research on when it was founded, so I know when to place my series, because I have caught, like, errors at Black Sails. I loved that show, but they did not do their research, because they had the governor of California sending his daughter to Savannah for protection at least 15 years before the place even existed.
Yeah, that's a major screw up.
Yeah, and then especially working out at Volkswagen, which I've been there for almost 14 years now, seeing guys interact together a lot with not many women around like it was early there. There's a lot more women there now, but seeing the guys interact, it's like, that gave me good background for doing the interactions with my pirates.
Okay.
The steampunk stuff is pure off the cuff, out there.
Okay.
Now, so.
Louise?
If I'm answering the right question, I hope I am. I figure I have like at least three separate, like places of origin. And one of them isn't really a place. My mother was from Pennsylvania. They've been there for over 200 years. My father was from Georgia. They've been there almost 200 years in the southeast. And then both my parents were military. And that makes you an Army brat. And Army brats bleed olive drab, just like servicemen do. Army servicemen, sorry. Apologize to all the Navy people. Anyway, and what I've realized is roughly a quarter of my stories are either set in Pennsylvania, they're set in the southeast in an area that I have visited because I have family, I've lived or visited because I have family there, or they're Army oriented.
Okay.
So it's affected me a lot. And I find when I write a story, the very first thing I decide, before I even know what the story is about, when I'm just musing about it, is where is it going to be set? Because to me, setting is essential to knowing what you can do with any given story. So
Okay.
that's kind of where I am.
See, I tend to bring in little obscure history bits that I'll write into some of my novels, especially if it's set in the southern West Virginia area. Otherwise, my characters always tend to be self-sufficient and trying to figure out the problem the best way they can with the least amount of resources possible. But that's just how I grew up. You made do with whatever you had, and you figured out how to make it work. I like that challenge, and that's probably one reason I like writing post-APOC, because of the challenge of how do I make this survivable and workable and building a community when there's nothing left. And, you know, that whole what if is just, I love it. But I grew up with that kind of stuff. What do you think is important when bringing in some of your root stuff? I mean, depends on which series that you're playing with, you know, what setting that you're playing with. Is it more important to have the backdrop set like where you grew up, or is it more of the character, you know, with who you were or people you knew? 'Cause I know I base a lot of my characters on people I know or knew, who I grew up with. I mean, I've got more than a few that I've just Tuckerized people I knew. And to me, it makes it easier to write those characters, because I already know their inflections, I know their mannerisms, you know. But at the same time, the places I've been or grew up in, it's easy to write those because I've been there. You know, I can write all day long about Okinawa and Kadena because I spent 3.5 years there. So, you know, when it comes down to things like that, what do you think is easier?
I take a lot of my initial feel and vibes of what I'm going to write about based on the character and what their background is, and then jumping forward from that. I've been in a situation economically, you know, my family was really well off, and I've been in the just shy of heating Spam on a flat plate. Poor, and I've lived in the middle of the ghetto, and I've lived in like the fancier end of town before like town encroached back on itself, and it's just I like to get inside my characters' heads about where they're going to be, and then I'll think about where the stories are going to go from there, and then what's going to complicate their lives most.
Okay, so you're building the character up first before you really build the story up.
9 times out of 10.
Okay.
Either the character gets the initial front load, or if I have a particular monster, like say with like trailer parks or something like that, and I have a specific monster or danger or threat that I need to play in, then I'll build off of that first, and then see who's going to be the kind of people that are going to live in that particular neck of the woods.
Okay.
And what biases they might encounter, and run from that.
Okay. No?
Wow, you guys think about your stuff way more than I do. If I am writing something placed on Earth, which is not always what I'm writing, my Kaylee Chronicles, I purposely placed in Northern California. For me, it's more of putting in either Easter eggs or in-jokes more than anything else. Like I mentioned the fact that all of the medians on the California freeways in Northern California are oleanders. Okay, so if you've been in Northern California, you're going to look at that and snicker, because that is the only place in the U.S. I've ever seen oleanders used as the dividing lines. I'll drop a comment about looking at the view of the buttes.
Visit Orlando, Florida.
Well, do they have it there too?
Oh,
Yeah. Well, you know, but the buttes, most people have no idea that the buttes is in Northern California, in the county of Sutter, and it is the smallest complete mountain range in the world. It has 3 hills, but it is a complete mountain range. It has foothills and everything else. And there are all these little in-jokes that if you're from that area, you'll get it. And if you're not, it's just going to be, oh, okay, they're looking at some mountains.
Yeah.
And you go right on. Like in my Twisted Luck series, there's one point where she's walking down the street in downtown Atlanta looking at all the big banners for the convention coming into town. Well, if you've ever been to Dragon Con, you know exactly what those banners look like. And if you haven't, you're like, oh, okay, cool, there's a convention, and that it doesn't occur to you. So I like doing those little things that, you know, come from places I've lived or places I've been more than, I mean, so many of my characters aren't human. Or quit being human halfway through the story.
Tamara?
I do concentrate more on character than I do on place. Now, I do try to, if I'm writing someplace that I haven't been, and also considering that at least one of my series is definitely set in a time I never lived in, I do my research then. Huh?
You're not immortal? Darn it.
A true immortal is very hard to find. Just about anything can be killed.
Very true.
No, but like I say, I will do my research to try to bring the place itself to life, but a lot of what I write goes into the characters. You know, the different inflections, the different behaviors, what kind of characters these characters are going to meet. Because, like I say, pirates, there's a certain class of people that they're going to meet, that they're going to interact with more than other classes.
Okay. Next.
I guess once I figure out where the place is, and especially with things that might be related to my roots, is for me, and I think for most writers, I think everybody else has said, it's the characters. And given that I'm 2 generations back from dirt farmers and 1 generation back from what they used to call them lint heads, people that worked in the cotton mills, those people were kind of rough, just a little bit. The Pennsylvania farmers were a little bit more genteel than the Alabama and Georgia farmers, but not much. And so when I came across a possibility for a series of stories that I just had to write, they were about Alabama brothers with the same name, not the same last name, the same first name. And my family, I have 2 uncles with the same first name. Not uncles on the other side of the family, uncles on the same side of the family. Both Williams. One was William and one was Bill. And we called them that way my entire life. And when I later met people who knew them out in the world who called them the wrong name, I'm like, oh, no, that's Uncle William. Or, no, that's Uncle Bill. We have to keep those separate. We don't know which one we're talking about. But I realized when I created the characters that were similar to those farmers and mill workers that I was recreating members of my family and not necessarily the characters that I had come up with. So I didn't have to do much research. It was pretty easy, to put those individuals in them. And I was always careful to be sure that they were dead because my depictions weren't always very attractive. And the other thing I've always done is because I'm a lawyer by trade, I have to make sure that no character I write resembles in any way other than they have 2 feet, 2 arms, 10 fingers, etc., any client I have ever had. And I've been practicing law for 40 years.
Yeah.
So that is a challenge to do that. But I wrote these stories called Earl and Bubba about 2 brothers named Earl. By the same mother, she liked the name, so she named them both Earl. And one was Earl and one was Bubba. And they do incredibly silly, stupid things. And when I first started writing them, I was mad at Writers of the Future for not giving me an honorable mention. So I used to send them what I called revenge stories. And I would send them these Earl and Bubba stories with slight fantasy elements. And then I would read them in my writers group, and they said, "You need to submit that somewhere." I said, "No, nobody ever wants it." Well, I'll be damned. 3 of them have been published at this point. And I don't know if I'll ever publish the whole thing. I'm not quite sure that I want to admit that I've written all of them. But
we have a trailer park series. It sounds like Earl and Bubba would work fine.
they live in a trailer, but not in a trailer park. They live on family land. And yeah, I do those. And so those are kind of crazy. But then when I write about the Pennsylvania relatives, they are slightly more genteel, but like 1 step above it. And they're Pennsylvania Dutch. And that is a very distinct ethnic group that has certain characteristics that I know of because I've lived among them that nobody else has, like in the entire world. So I don't do any research for those. I do all my research for stuff that's not related to my roots. And that would include my Army stuff, because my Army stuff is based on stories that my parents told me. And I've had to do little or no research for those.
Now, bouncing off the mill, Easter eggs and tropes and things like that, you know, we're all influenced by a lot of stuff we grew up with, and well, even now, you can get influenced. But what do you find yourself using those as just fun little Easter eggs and stuff? What do you keep finding that you put into your works? I mean, I usually have little, like, paying homage to all the stuff that I love, Spaceballs, Star Trek, Ice Pirates, things like that. I mean, my first novel is just full of Easter eggs. I lost count of how many is actually in there. But it's the stuff that I love and has influenced me in some way.
I tend to do silly stuff, like at least 90% of my characters are coffee addicts.
Oh, we got Java Crucians in Flux Runners because I love coffee, and it's a whole religion.
Yeah, I mean, it tends to be silly stuff like that. I mean, this is gonna sound horribly arrogant, and I don't mean it to be. The first probably 3 or 4 novels, I did a lot more of that. About novel 10 or so, I really don't do it anymore, other than the occasional, somebody will get this sort of Easter egg.
Yeah.
Because I've already written all of those stories, and after a while it just got boring.
Right.
And then I'm also doing so much other stuff that isn't necessarily somebody even on this planet, much less, you know, anything else.
I bury all kinds of little Easter eggs and pop culture references and things like that in my stories.
Oh, it's fun.
It's fun. Yeah, like my first Finn short story, he got knocked upside one of those tile, the floor tiles in the server rooms. So like the 3x3s,
Yep.
and got knocked upside down and ended up in the subfloor. And he's trying to get his friend to help him out. And he's like, Aziz, light! Because the Fifth Element is like, it's, but little throwaway lines like that. I love peppering stuff with pop culture geekery.
Ladies?
I would say not so much Easter eggs as I will Tuckerize or red shirt people. It's red shirting only in the Waves of Darkness. In the Adventures of Pig and Wolf, I actually have Tuckerized a co-worker. I made him one of my villains. Another co-worker let me use her name for another one of the, not really a villain, but one of the antagonists, not protagonists. And then one of my convention friends, I made her a recurring character. You know, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I really, part of it is probably generational, that Easter eggs were not a big deal in the early 60s.
Okay.
So I really don't use them. The only time I did it is once I wrote a story that was set in Huntsville in the library, and we were at a ride-in, and my girlfriend, for NaNoWriMo, threw away a can. And I was appalled by it and got her to put it in the recycle unit. Well, a whole story came out of that, and it included, and I called it Mel's story for my girlfriend, and that she got snatched out by a devil, reached through the library wall and grabbed her foot and pulled her through, and I got pulled through with her. And then when I talked about what the devil was making them do as repentance, they were reading the slush pile at Writers of the Future. Every bad story that I mentioned was a story that I had submitted that had not gotten placed. It had like the plot in and all. And I thought, this is like the best hate story I've ever said to Writers of the Future. So I've got to send it to him. So I sent it to him, and the damn thing got an honorable mention. And it's got my girlfriend's got my name on it. And then it says Mel's story, and that's her name, but she didn't write the story. So I made a nice color copy and framed it and gave it to her. So here's her, she won't submit to Writers of the Future. And that's the closest I've ever come to doing an Easter egg, and actually it was a little love song to the judge at the time, to Chanel with Katie Wentworth, that all the stories that she had rejected, about 10 of them were mentioned.
Well, do y'all have any questions? Anybody? Well, let's see, we're at what, like 4:30?
4:20. could
grown with
just watch,
something.
I could just watch her.
The cider kicked in.
So, one of the fun things about, honestly, being Gen X, and that I have a large set of fans that tend to be millennials and younger, is doing little things in my books that flat out aren't things that are common anymore. Like talking about a character was out getting crawfish. Well, you haven't actually ever had crawfish. You're like, what? Wait, you can get things that look like shrimp from the streams? And it's like, yes, you can. They're very yummy. And it's fun to put in things that I grew up doing. Because like I said, since I grew up on a farm, I raised goats, I raised rabbits, we had chickens, we had ducks, we had pigs, we had drop calves. So my characters almost always will eat everything because I pretty much will eat almost anything. By the way, I don't care what you pay me. I am not eating scrambled brains with eggs. And I will never eat chicken feet soup, both of which have been offered to me, because I know where those feet have been. And you cannot convince me you can ever get it that clean. But that's also some of the fun stuff, because this isn't stuff that the majority of Americans are growing up and experiencing anymore.
Well, pig's feet.
No, pigs will eat.
Pig's feet, I'll sit there and eat. They lop them off, they clean them up, but you really start to think of it, and it's an actual pig's foot with the knuckle in the jar, but it's damn good if it's done right.
See, I prefer them smoked. I don't particularly like them like that, but I like them smoked.
Well, the ones that we always had back home, they would smoke them and then they would pickle them.
Oh, really?
So they would last longer.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, there was a book that came out, I think it was literary fiction, that had crawdads in the title. We didn't call them crayfish or crawfish, we called them crawdads. And we would get them out of the creek,
Yeah, with the
and we
crawdads.
put them in aluminum, well, they were bathtubs, but they were aluminum bathtubs, put enough water in the bottom that they could kind of move around. And it had to be creek water, because we knew if it was tap water, kill them, and we used to fight them.
Yep.
And I just don't know that children have this privilege.
We used to do that all the time, but we used the bird bath.
Yeah.
We'd set them up in the bird bath, where we'd catch a praying mantis, and here's the crawdad, and we got the battle royale of the insect world, going on.
Yeah, ours were like 3 feet long and so wide, and we did all that, and I thought about
The cubs.
putting
Okay,
that,
I was about to say.
putting that in a story, but I never have, and then I saw somebody use crawdads in literary fiction, and I'm like, well, crap. I screwed up, I should have written about that a long time ago.
Well, I mean, and that's some of the fun stuff. So my grandparents were basically a little bit over subsistence level farmers. In fact, my grandpa told me one time that he knew he had to propose to my grandma because she was the only person he'd ever seen that could run 18 mules through the bean fields and not hit a single bean. But my dad would tell me about the stuff he did as a kid. Holy moly, they'd go out there and build potato guns on a regular basis and get access to all the black powder and go out there and make their own pipe bombs and everything else. And
Because it was fun.
oh, it was, but I mean, nowadays, can you imagine the uproar?
Oh, it's even more fun if you know how to make your own black powder.
Yeah. Oh, hell, we used to do BB gun wars and
Oh, yeah.
Roman candle wars out in the forest in the middle of fall.
Yes.
So, we're just dying to start a forest fire, but nobody ever paid attention to that at that time.
Teenagers are not the smartest.
And BB guns hurt.
Yes.
I did include in one of my Earl and Bubba stories a scene where they fiddled worms. And people don't fiddle worms except out where I live. They still fiddle worms.
Okay, explain what fiddle worms is.
Fiddle worms, you go out into the woods and you find a sapling about 2, maybe 3 inches around. You cut it off at an easy height. You get a big flat stone and you start rubbing it across the top of the sapling. And that sapling, all of its roots, because it makes a horrible noise, will start vibrating, and every creepy crawly thing for the diameter of those roots will come out, and you get all your fishing worms, all your grubs, all that. You might get a snake or two, so you gotta be a little careful. Especially in Alabama, we've got, I think, 3 out of the 4 poisonous snakes.
Yeah. Well, you're going to have copperheads, cottonmouths,
Scorpions.
timber rattlers.
Yeah. So you had to be a little careful. But then on the other hand, we used to like to bother the rattlers, and we would go find where they were down in the roots of a tree, and we'd get M80s and toss them down there to see them come up.
Yeah.
So we were nuts. We were
Oh,
crazy.
I found out why, when you kill a snake, you allow it to be dead for a few hours before you try to skin the stupid thing. Because I was skinning, what was it? It was a 4-foot rattler. And that thing kept moving on me. And I'm trying to take the knife to go up the belly, and the snake's going like this. No, it hasn't had a head for at least an hour.
It's even worse if you add salt to it, just like frog legs.
Gosh. Yeah, that was the most difficult skinning job I've ever done because the snake wouldn't hold still. I mean, I had even nailed the tail down, trying to hold it down. Yeah, no, there are reasons you age meat sometimes.
Well, you know, and I'm worried about whether the millennials would be interested in this stuff. You know, the crap we used to do. So
Well, we didn't have electronics in front of us
No,
all the
nothing.
time, you know? We had to find ways of doing things.
I learned to type on a manual typewriter.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
a reason
so-
we survived stuff that would send them screaming.
I mean, I remember, for my parents, it was if their bedroom door was shut, unless there was bone or fire, we were not to knock on that door. Blood didn't count.
Yeah.
Blood didn't count. There had to be bone showing or fire. And then the rule was, be home in time to do chores. Note that we roamed 50, 60 acres, and there's no calling us to get home. I mean, best case, if we were close enough, we might hear him yelling.
Yeah.
But, I mean, my brother was insane, is insane. He'd take his bike and grab his fishing poles and go to the reservoir, which was Camp Far West. It's a 20-mile bike ride.
Yep.
And he'd jump on his mountain bike and be gone all day out there fishing, and then would take the 20-mile bike ride back. If he had ever gotten hurt at any point, and we're talking roads like this.
And no one would have known.
No one would have known ever. In fact, I had one time, I had ridden into town and got bored, decided to take the long way home, so I went around that. Hadn't occurred to me to bring a water bottle or anything. I finally gave up and walked up to somebody's house, opened the door and said, "Can I get some water?"
Yeah.
Because it's 100 degrees out.
Okay, well, I mean, we're getting to a good point for storytelling, the things, you know, that could influence some way. You know, before I went in the Air Force, I was starting to prep for boot camp. So I was running, I was lifting weights, you know, and one of my friends at the time, he was going to go in with me. So we were running up the holler, and we got these old mine roads back up in the woods in southern West Virginia. And we just take this one road up and around, you know, we take different paths. And these are old abandoned mine roads that they don't use anymore. And well, we got so far back and it started to get dark, and then it got darker, and it was a new moon. So it was pitch black in the middle of nothing. So we worked our way slowly off the side of the mountain with other things moving around us that were growling and grumbling, and we couldn't tell what the hell it was. We finally got down off the hill, found a road, walked our way out, and we ended up 2 valleys over where we had started. Just wandering through the woods, and you know, we could have fell off a cliff and never known it because there was no light.
You poor-sighted people.
Yes.
But you know, that in itself, I mean, that is scary and exhilarating all at the same time, because you don't know, that unknown is right there at you.
Do you guys know what a flue is? F-L-U-E?
Yes.
You should be.
No. Water flue, bringing water down from reservoirs.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, for those of you who don't, imagine a 55-gallon drum, okay? Triple it. So it's a really huge thing, and then cut it off. And then line them up end to end to end. So they take these big, huge flues and connect them to the reservoirs, and then that's how water will get down into the valley to water crops and stuff. You know, so they're about 5 feet across. You weren't supposed to do this, and they have sealed most of them up over the years. So we hike all the way up to the top. You take your inner tube, drop your inner tube in, drop, and you would then
There's your water part.
Yeah.
We would ride them for like 20 miles and have somebody who had a car down there waiting for us. And the problem is that if the water level was high, you were occasionally doing this because there's slats. And so if you put your head up, the slat's going to come like here and take your head out. So you're leaning to have the slats, but if the water's low, you're having to lift your butt up so that your butt isn't hitting the corrugated metal as you go down. Oh my gosh. If people had seen the things we did, because, yeah, no, we risked our lives pretty regularly, and that nobody, we didn't have like, we were all like, oh, this sounds like great fun, let's go do this
Or how
illegal
about,
thing.
does anybody know what rock salt from a 12 gauge feels like?
No, thank
It
you.
hurts. It hurts very badly. And you know, when you get a 12 gauge drawn on you because you're stealing apples out of the old man's orchard, and you hear that screen door, the creak of the spring on that screen door, and you know exactly what's coming, you immediately let go and drop to the ground. But no, his aim is that good because he pops off squirrels at a good range. Man, I tell you what, it didn't penetrate anything, but it hurt. At 30 yards, it still packs a punch.
As far as he's concerned, you're just a big squirrel.
Yeah, but you know, he had loaded his
Shells.
shells with rock salt, mainly for the squirrels, because he didn't really want to kill them, but he wanted to get them out of the crop. Yeah, I like the apples, and you know, I just on the way home from school, I'd swing over there. And, yeah, man, I sit up in the tree and eat apples, and yeah, no. That was an interesting experience that I will absolutely never forget. Always pay attention to where you are and be respectful of other people's property.
But you just reminded me a similar story that my husband told me from his childhood that I used as a childhood story from one of my main characters in my steampunk serial about the old where his grandmother lived in Savannah. Her next door neighbor had a plum tree.
Mm-hmm.
It's either a plum tree or a pear tree, but he and his cousins would climb the fence and go over there and get the plums and then run to get back across the fence before her dog.
Yeah.
I was like, if they had asked her, she would have given them all the fruit they wanted and all, but they did it because they liked getting chased by the dog.
Yeah, it was the excitement, the adrenaline rush. We were bored as kids.
So, I would go to we had a big pond back behind our property, and I'd go over to a friend's house. Well, the problem was there was this one section of about 5 to 10 acres that was fenced off, and if you cut through that area, it was much shorter. But then going on. The problem was there was a bowl in that area. And so you would stand there at the edge of this fence and go, okay, the pool is all the way over there. Can I get through and across and back through before it can get to me? And that was a regular, you know, how fast can you move?
Yeah.
Oh.
I've
be
seen memes
stupid.
based on that.
Well, yeah, but we
It's like, can you make it across this field in so many seconds because the bull can make it in?
Who has played Far Cry 5? Okay, you know the sound of the mountain lion in the game. I started to panic and freak and back up on the couch to run. But when one of I was playing the game and I dropped the controller as soon as I heard that. I went into fight or flight mode because growing up in southern West Virginia and running through the hills by myself like an idiot. Black Panthers are a real thing, and they are running around in the Appalachians. So are mountain lions, and bobcats, and black bears. And I would go up on this one hill over on the opposite side from where my grandparents' place was. And there was no graveyard up there where a lot of the miners from the mine that was on the opposite valley had been buried. And, you know, I'd be up there just hanging out. Now on the top of these mountains, where all the dirt and everything had been washed off, you've got these large boulders sitting up there, these large rock formations. And you can go up there and hide out and hang out, set up on top of them. It's beautiful. So I'm sitting up there, I'm just chilling, and then I hear that grumble. I'm like, what the hell? And then you hear that cry, and there's a panther. And I'm about to shit myself because it's coming up the rock formation to me. And I jump off of this thing, which is about 35 feet off the ground, not counting the hillside sloping down, jump off, grab the tree, and literally do the dip down, hit the ground, and hauling ass downhill. Same similar situation, black bear. Just wanders up the hillside while I'm sitting up there. And, you know, depending on the time of the year, they get very territorial. You know, whether it's mating season or if it's been a really bad season, there's not a lot of food stuff. And they will chase anything that's edible. Black bears, their front legs are shorter than their rear legs, so if you run downhill, they will not be able to follow you without tumbling and falling. Same similar situation. hauling ass down the hillside, again, same thing, jump off of it, get that same tree, it's still flexible. This time, I fell into a grave.
Ooh.
Okay, now the old school graves from turn of the century, pine boxes. And if you're ever up on a hillside and you see a depression that's kind of person length,
Yeah.
you know that there's a good chance that it was a grave. And, being that there's just unmarked graves all over this hillside from the miners that died, and they pulled them out. I knew exactly what I fell into. I never did go back and figure out which one. Looking back, I could have probably collected so many skulls and wouldn't have even known it. But, I fell into this grave and up to my knees. I'm like panicking, trying to scramble out of it. And the next couple steps after I got out of it was like step, and leap over the old barbed wire. That there was an old barbed wire fence that ran because the one farmstead that used to be up in this holler, they had all of this property fenced off at one time for the cattle and the goats and stuff that they had back here. But the fencing was still there and been overgrown, like the trees had absorbed this fencing, and you had to leap over that or else you're going to get tangled up in it. I finally made it away, and just little things like that, it's like, oh my God.
Look, I just want to freely say that if I am ever killed by a cougar, you can 100% guarantee my last words are, "Oh, you're such a good kid." I know myself. I'll be like, "Oh my gosh, you're just so gorgeous."
But literally hearing that on that game, they did justice to the sound in that game because it sent me into full fight or flight mode because I heard it and like, oh my dear God, I have been there before. And I didn't want to be there anymore.
See, the only thing that gets me in games is where they're like, or they do this in movies, where they've already got the shotgun, and you wait until you see the bad guy, and then they ratchet it. And I'm like, dude, if that was me, I just expelled a shell because it's ratcheted before I get anywhere near the point I have to use it.
Yeah.
And they always do it just because of the sound effect. And I'm like, anybody who actually is going to use the gun, that thing's been chambered for a while.
Yep.
It's like, quit it. I understand it's a good sound, but do it 5 minutes ago when you first picked up the gun.
We got any questions from anybody?
I mean, we can sit here and tell the stories of all the stupid crap we did as kids without any issue.
But that's what fuels a lot of stuff too.
Oh, I've got an adult one. This was in, once again, in rural southeast Georgia. And we were in a garage apartment over a freestanding three-bay garage. It was across a little ditch from the house that my mother-in-law and her husband were living in as my husband's stepfather. And they also had an old bus that had been converted into a RV, and they were renting that out to a guy. Well, his dog started raising hell. We went to see what was up, and there were somebody's sows had gotten loose, and we're talking pigs as big as a beetle.
Yeah.
Okay, and
So
there was 2
400 pounds at least.
Yeah, we thought there was just one, and then we saw the other one when it stepped out from behind something. It's like, and my stepfather-in-law was like, "Let's herd them up to the mill house and trap them there. We can keep them." And I'm like, "Jerry, you're an idiot." That's
Good try,
not
they're going to
happening.
eat you. I mean, cattle driving, that's one thing. Pigs, not so easy, especially that big, because they're stubborn at that point.
So we raised pigs, and the time what we were feeding them was just slop and stuff. Well, we had a barn raising a decade ago at that point. And it was a normal barn raising. My friends came in and helped, and so my parents had bought a whole bunch of beer because lots of the guys were coming to help drink beer. Well, my parents didn't drink beer. They didn't drink at all for the most part. And so it's a decade later, and this beer has been sitting in the refrigerators. We had a bunch of old refrigerators sitting in the barn, plugged in, powered, everything. They would just, we would keep like milk and stuff out there if we needed it. But the beer has been sitting there. We're talking like 3 or 4 cases of beer that just haven't got drank. And so my dad one day is like, "Well, do you think the pigs would drink the beer?" And we're like,
Oh dear God.
"Sure." And note that we're 10 or 12, so we're like, "Sure."
Why
Actually, I had to be at least 14 or 15. So they get all the beer. We're sitting here cracking beer, pouring it in. Drunk pigs are the most hilarious you've ever seen, because they're all over the and they wander and they're stumbling and falling over, and then they get back up and they come back for more. We spent at least an hour on the fence just dying of laughter watching these pigs who were more than happy to drink all the beer and got drunk as a skunk.
Deal.
It was just one of the most hilarious things we'd ever seen. Yes, we were horrible, horrible people. But I mean, you know, you're also talking about somebody who, when I was 6 or 7, you guys know what Bing cherries are? Okay, they're huge cherries. Most black cherries are about this. Bing cherries are like this. So my brother and I were up visiting my great-grandma in Oroville, Washington. And she had a Bing cherry tree. So we're up, because it was a huge, I mean, the cherry tree branches would take up this room. It was a huge cherry tree. So we're up there having contests as to who could swallow the most cherries. Again, these cherries are like this, and we're swallowing them. Intelligence level is not very high as
Oh,
children.
we used to have apple cores, you know, we'd throw them at each other, and that hurts when you square dip between the eyes. Yeah, no. We stopped that for a couple of those. We were bright.
The place I lived in Jackson, Tennessee, that we were renting, there was a sweet gum maple and a pine tree in the backyard, and suspended by T-bars, there was a clothesline between them, not attached to the trees, but close to them. Well, the first 3 branches of the pine tree were like a spiral staircase. Now, this, you got to consider that when I was living there, it's 1st through 3rd grade, and my brother's 3 years younger than me. So he's a little kid. We were climbing up the tree, grabbing a branch, swinging over to land on top of the T-bar, and then jump off. And there's sweet gum balls all over the place.
Oh, little slimy ones.
Yes! And we still did it.
Yeah, no, bad.
So I was totally into gymnastics as a kid. No, I was never in it, but I loved watching it. And we came up with something, and no, I don't have kids, so I don't know if this is still a thing. Probably isn't, because I almost gave my teachers a heart attack. But we had what were called cherry drops and dead man drops. Well, a cherry drop was where you would get on the bars and hook your knees over them and swing back and forth, and when you swung up enough, you would just flip and land. Relatively simple. Well, so we came up with dead man drops, which is where you sit on top of the bar, fall backwards, flip off, and land. My note that I went to a small Christian school. My mom taught kindergarten, and I was in 5th or 6th grade. So, you know, my mom, the teacher who taught 1st through 3rd, and the teacher who taught 4th through 6th. So you have 3 teachers. My teacher, Mr. Beatty, walks out and watches me do a dead man drop off the top of the swing set. I almost thought he was going to have a heart attack, and they went and got, and they're both like, "You can't do that, so dangerous." And I'm looking at them going, "What? We've been doing it for the last 6 months. You know, this is like number 500 or something."
And they never saw you.
Well, you know, most of the time, at least when I was a kid, it's like, "Are you running into the street?" "No, good, then we're ignoring you unless they're screaming coming out at recess time."
Okay, I think we're at time.
Yes.
So, any quick questions? All right, so back down the line, where can we find your stuff?
Oh, I've got some stuff on Amazon, and Jarrett Millett is in the first floor as you walk in headed for the con suite. He's on the back wall, has a copy of a Summer Gothic that has Earl and Bubba Save the King. The king is Elvis Presley. So that's the only thing I've got for sale. Everything else is in anthologies on Amazon.
Okay.
Let's see, Waves of Darkness is distributed wide, print, ebook, and Blood Curse is also on Audible. And The Adventures of Pig and Wolf, I do individual episodes on Amazon KDP, not KDP Unlimited, however, because if I do decide to go wide with them, I don't want to have to fight with them about that. And I do the print omnibus every 12 episodes. The 3rd one is available, it's just they don't ship fast, so I couldn't get it in time for the convention.
I'm Mel Todd. I have the Caleb Chronicles, the Twisted Luck series, a couple standalone fantasies, a military sci-fi apocalypse stuff. But even better for all of your buying pleasures is after this, I will be taking my box of books and sending up in a little alcove. Please come buy them, because I would like to take home less books than what I brought.
I'm Philip K. Booker, and you can find my material on Amazon, as well as 3ravenspublishing.com. And I do have a handful of books with me that I'm hauling around, plus a few more in the car. So,
And I'm William Joseph Roberts from 3 Ravens Publishing. You can find me at williamjosephroberts.com, 3ravenspublishing.com. I have cards, and I do have some books with me if there's anything that looks interesting, including a couple of stacks of Trailer Park 1 and 2. I think. But thank you all for coming. Hope you've enjoyed this panel, and have a good evening.
I forgot to mention, if you go in the dealer hall, I'm in the back left corner.